So in a sport as crazy as professional wrestling, you get a lot of different personalities. Some of them are good, like Eddie Guerrero, who is universally beloved by everyone in the front and the back of the wrestling scene, while others, like Phil DeMott, aren't as much. So naturally, when you have so many personalities, there are bound to be a few real-life fights that burst out that are called shoot matches. So, I'm the Excellent Reviewer, and let's talk about some of the most infamous shoot matches of all time. First up, we have New Jack versus Gypsy Joe. Now, if you don't know New Jack, he was a hardcore wrestler who worked with ECW, and he has a reputation of being really fucking crazy. And he ended up having a hardcore match in April of 2003 against Gypsy Joe, who was a former wrestler who was 69 years old at the time. New Jack was not a fan of this potential matchup because if he lost, he would look bad because he was losing to a 69-year-old man. And the other option for them at the time was them to do a comedy match, which New Jack says that he does not do comedy matches. Before the match started, New Jack was already in a bad mood with the idea of this match, plus someone in the crowd had called New Jack the N-word. Another thing that pissed New Jack off was the fact that Gypsy Joe had claimed that he was hardcore before hardcore was ever a thing, which is an insult to New Jack because New Jack fancied himself the best hardcore wrestler at the time. Gypsy Joe was also mad at New Jack because he felt as though New Jack wasn't respecting him at all in the back. During the match, there was a problem as Gypsy Joe hit New Jack with a stiff headbutt that made New Jack woozy. And Gypsy Joe felt as though, since it was a hardcore match, that anything goes. At one point in the match, Joe stopped selling for New Jack, and that was it. Because New Jack then proceeded to kick the shit out of the 69-year-old man, throwing various weapons at him. Now, if you want to see the match, it is on YouTube and you can find it, but I'm going to tell you right now, it's very brutal. People got mad at New Jack for acting so unprofessional, but mainly for the fact that he was beating up a 69-year-old man. But after this, they never met again. So the rematch would never happen as Gypsy Joe would pass away years later. The next match on the list is Earthquake versus Koji Katao. Now, John Tenta was better known as Earthquake in WWE, and before becoming a professional wrestler, he was a sumo wrestler, just like his opponent in this match, Koji Katao. But Katao, who had been previously fired from New Japan Pro Wrestling, and he was also kicked out of sumo. According to Mike D'Orso, who wrote for Sports Illustrated, said that Katao used to have temper tantrums, and he sidekicked his 88-year-old stable master, and shoved his master's wife into a sliding door. So it was safe to say that he was pretty much a dick. You can watch the match on YouTube, and you'll see as the match starts there is friction between the two, but the match seems to be going alright at first, but then after a takedown by John Tenta, Katao goes outside of the ring, grabs an announcer table, and throws it to the ground. The rest of the match was just them circling around each other. Katao was trying to poke out Tenta's eyes. Tenta at one point shouted, "This is pro wrestling!" Koji Katao then kicked the ref, and the match was thrown out, and Tenta was declared the winner. Koji Katao, after the match, grabbed a mic and would say, "Wrestling is fake," and this pretty much ended his wrestling career, as it would for anyone who disgraces the wrestling business like this, and Koji Katao will forever be remembered for this moment in wrestling history. Next up, we have the Great Antonio versus Antonio Inoki. Now, there's no doubt that you have all heard about Antonio Inoki, the living legend who helped create New Japan Pro Wrestling, and there would be people lined up just so they could get slapped by Antonio Inoki. Well, he was also a certified ass kicker that you shouldn't mess with. But unfortunately, the Great Antonio did not know that. The Great Antonio was a huge, and I mean huge, strong man. incredibly strong. He once lifted a huge tree trunk with 13 people hanging off of it, and once pulled a 400-ton locomotive 20 meters. So, he was very strong. So, on December 7th, 1977, the two were booked in a match, and as the match started, the great Antonio, who was very inexperienced as a pro wrestler, by the way, started to no-sell Inoki's moves, which is not a good thing to do, especially against a legend like Inoki. And it didn't help that the great Antonio then started making funny faces. Not long after the great Antonio hit Inoki with some very stiff shots to the neck, would Inoki finally have enough as he proceeded to slap the shit out of Antonio and would then kick him repeatedly across the face until he left the match declaring himself the winner, and no one really blames him. Next we have our first WWE shoot match on the list when it comes to JBL against the Blue Meanie. So this is not the first time that we've heard about JBL being a dick behind the scenes, and it won't be the last. For this one we go all the way back to 2005 at ECW's One Night Stand, and there was an angle scheduled where ECW Originals took part in a brawl with the Raw and SmackDown guys. And in this brawl, if you go and look back at the footage, you can see that JBL seeks out Blue Meanie intentionally and tries to actually hit him, and he does hit him in the face really hard. And you can tell because Blue Meanie was the only one out of that whole entire fight that his face was battered and bloodied. Apparently, Blue Meanie had said some unkind words in an interview saying that JBL was a bully backstage and that JBL was a bit of an asshole, and that was enough for JBL to go after the Blue Meanie. However, WWE worked this into an angle, and in a match between the two on SmackDown, JBL got his comeuppance when Stevie Richard, who is a good friend of Blue Meanie by the way, struck JBL in the head with a steel chair as hard as he could. And also followed by that was a DDT by the Blue Meanie, thus ending the feud between the two. Finally, to finish off this video, we have one of those shoot matches, which was probably one of the first shoot matches ever, and let's talk about it. We have to go all the way back to 1925 when Stanislaus Zbyszko took on Wayne Munn for the NWA World title. So let's talk about the Goldust Trio, who were basically ended up changing professional wrestling to what it is today. Toots Mon would make wrestling matches have scripted endings as opposed to having multiple hour-long matches that were sometimes boring. Stanislaus Zbyszko had been a world champion before, but it was considered a flop. And Wayne Munn, who is a former football star, was positioned to be the next big star in pro wrestling. But there was a problem. Wayne Munn wasn't a good wrestler. Like, at all. So, naturally, not too many wrestlers who were naturally gifted and spent years perfecting their craft were happy about the push that Wayne Munn was getting. So the match between Munn and Zbyszko took place, but there was something wrong as soon as the match started. Zbyszko was supposed to put Munn over in a 2 out of 3 falls match. Zbyszko, who happened to be one of the best catch wrestlers at the time, then proceeded to use his wrestling skills to pin Munn over and over again to win the NWA title, destroying Munn and his push completely. Now, why did Stanislaus Zbyszko do this? It was simple, because he would get paid to do so, and he would get paid even more money to drop the title to Joe Stecher. Now, I know that there are even more shoot matches than just these particular 5, and there are more in wrestling history, but this is all the time that we have for today. And if you take away anything from this video, it's that fact that some wrestlers are definitely crazier than others.